You got 5, 10 seconds to capture somebody's attention before you lead them to the next point, or they'll leave.
That's Ramli John. He's the host of the Marketing Powerups podcast, author of Product-Led Onboarding, director of content at AppCues, and formerly a professor at Centennial College where he taught entrepreneurship. It was during that time as a professor that he mastered a teaching framework that will change the way you think about copywriting and content marketing forever.
When you tell something, okay, sure, cool, show me an example. Once you show an example, show how to do it. And then that's how you get them to apply.
In our conversation, we talk about a simple copywriting framework that encourages your reader to take action, the role of experts in producing high-quality content and leveraging internal knowledge, and why content should be treated as a product and its ability to facilitate transformation. I'm Tommy Walker, my guest is Ramli John, and this is The Cutting Room. Ramli, welcome to the show. Tell me, what is your content marketing philosophy and how has it evolved over time?
We were chatting about this before, and one of the things that people love talking about is content is product. The content is product. And I have a different perspective on this because I worked with product managers. I wrote product-led onboarding. I think there's people don't think about the implications of this. There's three implications that my philosophy around content as product means. I think one of the first one is that content is about transformation. I don't think people realize this, that when people talk about product, they think right away about this framework called jobs to be done. That when you have a product, is doing something. People are hiring that product to do something. When you have an iPhone, you hire it to make calls, but to play your games, to have FaceTime, to connect with folks. But people don't really think about other things about it. There's also an emotional side to the job, to iPhone. When you think about iPhones, what are some of the things that people think about emotionally? Think about cool, or
Yeah.
I'm sorry for everybody who are Android fans right now. So my brother is he's definitely a hater. There's the emotional aspect and there's a social aspect to products. When you think about iPhones, there's Apple communities where you can hang out with other things. And I feel like people don't realize that with content as product means that there's that three aspects to it. There's the functional job that you have talked a lot about, Tommy. I know you have an article here about, that there's 4 jobs that content has.
To be shared, to drive discussion, to generate leads, or to make sales.
There you go.
And yeah, when it comes to a job to be done, I think what a lot of what we see out there is when people create content, right? Bosses in particular, they want a piece of content to do several jobs, right? One of those 4 jobs. And what we have to do is think about the job of that piece of content is to do one specific thing. And the way that I view it is about doing one of those 4 gigs.
But people don't think about jobs to be done as having emotional aspect to it. When people read a piece of content, the best ones elicit emotion. And I feel like there's this emotional transformation that the best content we have has around us. And that's what great content does. They take away that anxiety, they take away that apprehension, and there's that emotional side to it. So I feel like there's a lot of social aspect to it where the best content gets shared. And when you share it, there's what will my boss think when I share this? What will my friends think when I hold an iPhone? It's similar to that. So I think that's the first implication to what I see content as product means, is that there's this aspect that people don't think about, that there's this job, this goal that we're trying to really complete with that. So that's the first one. Second one is really, and this ties back to my book, Product-Led Onboarding, is that if content has a job, our role as content producers is to get them to that value as quickly as possible. And whatever that means is really getting them to getting them on board to that transformation, to that function, to that emotion, and to that social aspect to this. And I know you talk a lot about this. I've watched some of your other episodes here, and you came once again, you came on the show. You talk about one of your pet peeves. Tommy, correct me if I'm wrong. Is that one of your pet peeves is rambling intros, intros that are way too long.
Yep.
And I feel like that's leading to this, where just show the value, man. If you have a product that takes too long to get people to show the value, people will leave. And that's true for content as well. I think if we don't hook them to what their goal is as quickly as possible, then they're either scroll down, or now with very impatient people, they'll just leave. They'll just bounce out. I think that's a super
Hmm.
important part of it. And I think the very last thing here is like thinking about it as like a longer user journey. We talk a lot about top of the funnel content, but a lot of the content we produce can also help out customers, and help out people who are already bought our product, but they want to level up to the next level. And that ties back
Hmm.
to products as well, where like the best onboarding experiences I've seen, where they usually start off with level one, where like easy mode, like a video game, and then level two is like intermediate mode, and then level three is like hard mode. Like, how do we think about like our content as helping level up people from level one, level two, level three, and then they become an expert eventually, and not just think about it as like top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel. More like let's let's turn little Mario into a fireball spitting Mario, and then to a
Yep.
flying Mario. And that's what content as a product can potentially do, is to transform people to become better versions of themselves, essentially. And I think those three are like really wrapped up. And when I think about content, um, does it meet all three? And if it does, that usually is a good sign that it's on the right path to being something worth sharing or consuming.
Let's talk about the development of a product, right? Because you've done product led onboarding. What does that look like when it comes to really thinking about it, not as words on a page or voice into a mic, but as the development side of that?
Yes, I think the big. I love how you brought this up around the development of it, and you have some great people here. Actually, Brendan Hufford talks a lot about this. Just like in
Yep.
product, before you even build a feature or start, how do you improve user onboarding? You start off by talking to your users, your best users. They know the path that got them there to succeed with your product. And I feel like it's true as well with content. If you have like a goal you're trying to achieve, Brendan loves saying this, like, talk to your customers, man. And like often, people got to check that episode out because it's so good. He's just a good guy and energetic. But he talks about like people love talking about keyword research from the beginning, and digging into it. But like, what really gets people is when you tap into their struggle, their emotion, and that you can't get that from keyword research. We cannot get that from like, sure, we can get the what, but the why and the emotion and the human part
Yeah.
to content that really gets them excited to share it is something that we can't get from the technical side of it. There needs to be that balance, and I feel like and I believe you talked about this in your episode as well. Like we've kind of swung too far to the technical side, and now
Hmm.
I feel like it's swinging back to like the human touch. I know I chatted with Brooklyn Nash from Beam Content about this. He's calling like, how do we get more expert driven content where we're featuring people who know about stuff and can share proprietary processes. And I feel like that's where it really needs to start if you're creating something great. And it doesn't have to be outside experts. It could be somebody from within your company who might know something more about that specific topic. um, an example I'm talking about right now is like, I'm doing a whole like piece for AppCues right now about user research, and how to do user research better. And sure, I can like just Google stuff, go to keyword research, but we have a resident user researcher at AppCues, and I talked to her this morning and like, show me how you do your thing. How do you do research? And like, what is your
Hmm.
templates? And like, what questions do you ask? And she showed me like every single thing in the slide deck. I'm like, I would not have gotten this from Google because you're keeping it internally, and it's something that you do so well that it's like totally in our internal Notion space right now. And because of that, like this content is better because of what you have shared and the thoughts that you have brought. So I feel like that's where it really needs to start, especially when content development and like starting off from a specific topic.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's so important, especially now, right? Like a lot of content can be commoditized, a lot of the how to, a lot of the why. That type of stuff is now, I mean, let's say it, like we can just put it off to AI, right? Like, and I hate to bring up AI in every single one of these conversations now, but it's so true. And if um so what we have to look at is why is or how to. It's more about like how to do it our way, right? How to think about it our way. You could say all day long how to research a blog post, but that doesn't do anything unless you have some very specific steps and methodologies and ideologies behind why all that is the way it is. So let's talk about your creation process from ideation to publication.
I come from an education background as well, and one framework that they use in terms of like helping people learn something is something called tell, show, tell, and then do. So there's this loop where like when you tell something, okay, sure, cool, show me an example, and
Yep.
then once you show an example, show how to do it, and then that's how you get
Yep.
them to apply.
I'm sorry. I'm going to hold you to this for the
Okay,
second because you have the Marketing Powerups podcast and the
right.
newsletter. Tell me, show me, and do and tell me how you do it when you're creating a podcast episode.
I would start off getting the interview, let's say the latest episode one, and how I'm thinking about like producing the latest episode with Peter Caputa from Databox. Tell is like, okay, sure. He talked about this idea called survey driven content and why
Yep.
it's important. It's hard to copy, and getting it's once you have survey data, it can be easily shared. It can support you across the thing. That's a tell part is like sure why it's good, what it
Hmm.
is. Once I have that, I'm thinking about like the next step, the show. So I gave an example with in that particular episode with the 2023 business state of business reporting that they did. So here's a great
Hmm.
example of survey driven content that Databox created. They have some stats, they have some quotes, they have like a report that they created for this that shows exactly why business reporting is important. That's the show part, and then the last step is do, which like okay, Peter Caputa now shares the 3 steps to creating survey driven content, and
All right.
I provided a power ups cheat sheet exactly on that episode with Peter, and people can download that cheat sheet, they can apply it, and then actually go with that specifically. So that's I guess that's an example where like that specific content where like I didn't just publish that episode, I broke it down to like tell me why is survey driven, what is it, show here's a great example, this business reporting, and then do okay, here are the 3 steps. Here's a cheat sheet you can download, go and apply it for your own business. So I guess that worked out.
Yeah. Yeah. See, not to put you on the spot like that, but that's what this is about. No, and like to produce your own episode too, right? If you're talking to your audience, it's like you're going to tell them what the episode is about, you're going to show them the entire process, and then the do part for you is going, okay, now here's the cheat sheet that you can use, right? To put that out there and do it yourself. So there's this like give and take an interaction with the audience that's not just, you know, here's a podcast, right? There's more to it than that, and there's more to what they're talking about in the survey driven content. So I think there's a lot of cool stuff happening sort of just overall in there. All right, keep going.
Yeah, I think the next part once I have that is like one of the big piece to creating content for me, and I try to do as much as I can. I actually learned this from Eddie Schleiner. He's the founder
Yep.
of Very Good Copy. Is he says that let your brain do its work, and what he means by that
Mm-hmm.
is like you've written it, leave it alone. Like I usually don't write that content on the day I'm gonna publish it,
Mm-hmm.
because then once I review it with fresh eyes the next day, or like if it is due that day and I was pressed for time, go for a walk or spend some time with my 10-month-old or like have dinner, and when I come back to that, like I look at it and it's like this is this needs work. And like your brain has like kind of digested that information. If it was like if content
Yep.
was like food, you're like marinating that content so that it isn't just like you don't just publish. I hopefully you don't just publish it like half baked or like half marinated, because I want, like,
Hopefully.
hopefully not. If you want your best work,
Hopefully.
like, let it. Like, what would is it meeting this criteria that tells you, oh, do I have sentences here that can be cut out? Do I have words that doesn't make sense? Or like, is there a better way to rephrase this? Is there points that I'm missing that I didn't have before? And I guess that's how I would see my editing process itself. The other tips that I've had that I try to do sometimes would be like read my content backwards. So like
Mm-hmm.
doing that makes it out of, like, helps me analyze the paragraphs itself, outside of like, oh, this is great, versus
Yep.
like, that paragraph, I'm not sure about that, man. I'm not sure about it. So that's my next step, specifically for editing before I hit publish. And then, there's this whole distribution piece that I think about as well.
Let's jump tracks into the pregame before you edit. Do you have any sort of rituals that you do,
Mm.
or anything of that nature, or is it just sit down and do the job?
Yes, I think the first thing would be like, sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. I've told this to my friends, where like, I when I have a book, especially a business book, I start I start with a conclusion, just because, like, usually the conclusion has like the main points. And actually sometimes do this with movies too. I know, Tommy, you came from a film background, so you're like, why would
Mm-hmm.
you do that, Ramli? You're ruining you're ruining the art. But like, watching the ending, specifically with business related, helps me understand like the why. Why should I care? What are the
Yep.
takeaways? And then like hitting up the points before I go through it. That would be usually what I would do before like I get into the weeds. Like, I want like a high level overview, starting from the end, because I know where I'm going, and then before I get into the weeds. Yeah.
Nice. All right. Cool. Well, we can do this a little bit early, but let's jump into the edit. Before we do that, folks, I'd love to show you a little bit about what's going on with aHrefs Webmaster Tools. So take a look at that, and we'll pull the edit right up. While we wait for the edit, let me tell you a little bit about aHrefs Webmaster Tools. Now, when I started the content studio, aHrefs was the first tool that I bought, and this will give you a taste of why. There are two parts to aHrefs Webmaster Tools: Site Audit and Site Explorer. Site Audit scans up to 5,000 pages per month and searches for over 100 predefined issues that could hurt your site's rankings. Once the audit's finished, you'll see your website's health score, a breakdown of the top issues, and how many URLs are affected. And if you need a refresher on what these issues are, they make it easy to see what it is and tell you how to fix it. To see which pages are affected by an issue, click on the number beside it, and you'll get a full list of URLs which you can then export and fix. They even made it easy to look at each category of issue with these super handy links in the sidebar. So if you want to see on-page issues, click over here, and now you've got a nice summarized report of things like word counts, title tags, and meta descriptions. You can also click on the Issues tab to see a list of issues labeled by importance so you can prioritize appropriately. The second part of Webmaster Tools is Site Explorer, which gives you a look into your backlink and search traffic data. Starting on Site Explorer's overview page, you can see top-level metrics for your website, like domain rating, total backlinks, total referring domains, and the number of keywords your site ranks for, and your estimated search traffic. And right below that is an interactive graph that shows you how fast you're acquiring backlinks from unique websites, which is a good indicator of your site's popularity. In this report, you'll see useful things like the website and page authority metrics of the linking page, and the number of referring domains it has, the estimated search traffic to that page, and the context of the link, which is all super convenient. You can also use these handy filters to really drill in on the data you want to see. There's also the Organic Keywords report, which shows you all the keywords your website ranks for. You'll also see keyword metrics like search volume, keyword, and difficulty score. You can also see the top content on your site based on their popularity on these social networks. This only scratches the surface of what Webmaster Tools is capable of doing, and you can do this absolutely free. All you have to do is go to ahrefs.com/AWT and verify your site within just a few clicks. All right, let's jump back into the edit. Before we jump into the edit, tell me your first impression of this piece.
first impression of the piece, like reading through it, was like, wow. I feel like, especially in the first couple of points, is like, I'm not sure if this person who wrote this has ever hosted a podcast or talked to a podcast. Like it's like, wow, like it doesn't really go into specific detail as to how and
Yeah.
what. And then the last couple of points are like, okay, now you're giving me the practical tips, like, oh, here's how to do this. So like maybe there's like some saving grace.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, especially with content, you want to start off. I know I'm tapping into your film background. Like, you want to start off with like a hook that grabs them
Yep.
attention, and starting off with a couple of points that hasn't doesn't really have that show and do part to it, out of that tell show do, is kind of disappointing.
Yeah.
And then they brought the end, was like, you should move this up because this is a great point. I guess we'll get into the specifics in a bit, but that's my first take.
One of the things I thought was interesting about this piece was the premise of it itself, right? Is how to be a good podcast host. Okay, like I would be remiss to say on sad days for myself, where I'm like doubting myself. Hey, let me Google something like this and see what comes up, right? Um, what was interesting to me about this piece, though, is that it makes the assumption that each podcast host is doing an interview style
Right.
podcast,
That is true.
right? Not everybody's doing an interview style podcast.
Right.
And because of that, this is a broad subject, but it's not necessarily making those specifications of what that particularly is. Because if you're doing like a documentary or docuseries type show, that's going to be very different than an interview style show. So I just wanted to
That's
put that out there, because
Yeah.
it's really important to drill into what that subject matter is, or at least say there are different styles and here's what we're going to be talking about today. So,
Yeah.
all right, let's jump in. So, a podcast host is the creator, the mediator, the reporter, and the glue that binds the show together. Hosts play a crucial role in the success of any podcast, because it's not just about having high quality audio. All right, what's your
Oh,
first comment here?
right. I feel like, oh man, first of all, good call out with that first one. Like, how to be a good podcast host with X would have been more helpful, like interview style. Second, I understand what they're trying to do here, and I made my first comment right below it, like, with such information, advise being yourself. It's almost impossible to
Mm-hmm.
precise. Going back to one of my philosophy around like content is product around jobs to be done. I feel like they could do a better job of painting a picture of what success looks like. What is that transformation? They're talking
Mm-hmm.
about like podcast host as a creator, media, like, cool. why? Why is it? What is the takeaway after getting consuming this content? How will it help me transform my show? Like that tip about be yourself. That's not really good, meaningful, actionable way. I feel like it's not necessarily needs to be there, but my advice, this is not a strong intro to hook me exactly, especially like if uh what is that transformation exactly, what I'm looking at. I would rewrite
Mm-hmm.
this, is what I'm saying, this intro. This is not.
in
Yeah,
in short,
it's short, yes, like,
in short,
even
the
you,
whole thing. Rewrite the
tell
whole
me,
thing.
even you reading it out loud, I'm like, wow, like it feels, it doesn't get me excited, like it needs to get me excited
Right.
to dig into the first point. Like, you got 5-10 seconds to capture somebody's attention before you lead them to the next point, or they'll leave.
I did pick this piece specifically because you are a podcast host, right? And there is some lived in experience that's there. One of the things from the outset, as somebody who does host a show, is the whole idea of be yourself
Mm,
is actually bad advice,
it is.
right?
Yeah.
In my mind, because yes, we're being ourselves, but we're heightened versions of
Mm,
ourselves. We have this avatar of ourselves that is something that's important to know how to tap into. If you watch old Mr. Beast videos or Marcus Brownlee, they are being themselves in front of a camera, and it's very deadpan, and it's very like, and it's not interesting to watch. So I think the first bit of advice is learn how to be the heightened
Mm,
version of
that's good.
yourself,
Right.
right? Like that's something that I would look at and start to develop an intro around that, because it's like there's a difference between you and then like the host you.
Right.
And if you don't understand that fundamental difference, everything
Mm.
else, like it doesn't like congeal around it.
There's this blog post by Wes Cow from Maven. She called it spiky point of views, where like you
Hmm.
take a contrarian point of view but like defend it, and you starting off with the best podcast hosts are not themselves, right? Like that is like yes. What
Yeah.
what do you mean? It's like you need to be a heightened version of yourselves, and just leading into
Yeah.
that like makes me like wait 1 second. You don't want me to be me. You want me to be fake. But no, that's you're telling me
Right.
that I need to be heightened. That is a much like spikier catchier hook that gets me into reading the rest of the article and like digging into exactly what that is. So
Yeah, I mean it's the whole idea of like if you want to be a good podcast host, you have to know how to be that heightened version of yourself, or like adapt that version of yourself to different formats. Somebody like Alton Brown, right, or Anthony Bourdain, or any of these
mm,
folks, they have the same show multiple times. How many versions of a cooking show can you have? But
right,
their character, while it's got some similarities
right,
between each one, it's still slightly adapted to whatever the context is. And I think that's something that I would try to build this particular article around. So,
love it. Yeah,
all right, let's move on. Do your homework,
right, dude.
right? Well, no one expects you to be an expert. Yes, they do. They most certainly do. It's never wise to go into an episode cold. Okay.
Yeah, you keep it keeps going. Having solid understanding of topic can be a different perspective, give you focus, fuel. So this is like the tell part. Like this is the telling
Mm-hmm.
you the why. Why should you do your homework? You know, different perspective. Give you focus. It fuels profound understanding that will benefit you. Okay, you got me there. Like I understand. I understand that. And then I keep going. Well, the primary purpose of this is to become an expert. I want to be an expert. Okay, cool. You got me. It leads to trust. And in the last sentence of this section, as you research and formulate a bullet list of information, and I'm like, where's the show? Where's the show in the
Yeah.
do? Like, what are examples of what I should be looking up? And much later in the article, they give like, look up their social media, use like look at what the recent posts are at, and then the do part is like here's some practical tips about this is like really missing there because you hook me like you painted that picture of what would happen if you do your homework. You'll become an expert, you'll get all of this, but the show and the do part is like missing in this first point, which is like really disappointing because like, once again it's the first point. It needs to be great. Like you've got me. If you got a great hook, the first point is probably the next most important thing, and this is not a great point to lead with. Is my point.
I would want to tie this back to also like how to be a good podcast host, right? Like if you're doing your homework,
Mm,
then, and what's the outcome of
exactly.
this?
Right.
The outcome of doing your homework is almost knowing what your guest is going to say
Mm,
and throwing those, like if you're doing your homework, I already have an idea of what you're going to say when I ask you the
right.
question, right? And then the second part of that is if you really have done your homework, you can throw some other stuff out there that might get them thinking, right? Right? Like tell me about, give me an example of tell, show, do,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly. Right.
So, you want to disarm as a host as much as you want to lead
Mm.
as a host. And that's something, the subject matter I would want to build around that sort of idea.
It's such a good point on
All right.
outcomes. That like, hey, it's really about speaking about that the job. Like you're, you know, because you do this, here's the outcome. Other outcomes could be like you can tap into stories that they've never shared with anybody, and that makes your show
Hmm.
unique in that sense. You can pull out insights that they've never talked about, or there's so much stuff here that they really could have the writer could have really dig into the outcome before the show and do. So you're right there.
Yeah. All right, let's keep going. As you research, formulate a bullet list of all the important and valuable takeaways from your findings and use this list as a reference guide. You have some stuff to say here.
Yes, this is the part where I was mentioning. We're like, cool, cool, cool. You told me why. You gave me a reason why, but the practical tip and the showing of it is the part that's missing. Questions like, what things should I be looking for? What things should I be researching? Where should I be looking at, and how? And how do I get those stories? How do I get those insights? What expertise do they have that you mentioned about disarming the guest and is showing something different to the audience? All of that stuff is missing here, and they're just kind of painted like, as you research, like this wrap up of
Hmm.
this specific point without like necessarily providing value to exactly what the next step is.
From a developmental standpoint, something I'd like to see from this too is, what if your guest doesn't have anything to do homework on?
Mm. Yeah.
Right? There have been a handful of people, and I'm sure this is the case for you too. Like, there have been a handful of people where you're like, I want to do my research, but they don't post on LinkedIn. They
Yeah.
don't have anything going
Mm.
on
That's
Twitter.
good.
Like,
Yeah.
they didn't write a book, but but they still have something really interesting, right? How do you dig into that a little bit further,
Right.
right? I'd love to see that as an addendum on here as well.
That's true. And we're making the assumption. I'm making the assumption right now. This is like an interview style podcast once again. The homework piece could be totally different if it was like a monologue or a murder
Hmm.
mystery or something else. So that is something that, once again, calling back to what you mentioned earlier about like it's making an assumption here that this is an interview style. This homework piece could look totally different for the type of show that this is speaking to specifically.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Okay, know your audience. You deleted the first one here, first line. Your audience plays a big part in how you work as a host. After all, the end result is for them, not for you. So you need to be tapping into what they need the most.
Right.
Tell me about how you feel about cutting obvious stuff, and how do you avoid stating the
Mm.
obvious when you either write or when you edit.
Yeah, I think that goes back to like taking a step away from your piece and coming back, and that's the first piece. The second piece is like really knowing your audience and who is this for. If it's for podcasters, may if it's for podcasters who have only started their show, maybe, like, I'm not entirely sure who that is. I'm reading
Mm-hmm.
this from the point of view like, you're already a podcast host. How do you become a better podcast host? How do you take it to the
Mm-hmm.
next level? So there's this certain level of assumption that I'm making here, that the people who are reading this have already started a show and they're already, what is the best mic? What is the hosting?
Yep.
What they've already launched a show, and now like your audience plays a big part in this. Like, that we're trying to grow an
Right.
audience already. So I think that's like, to your question about like how do you avoid stating the obvious. It's knowing where you think the audience is in terms of their journey to
Yep.
what they're achieving, and if they're already in the middle, don't give them information from beginner mode, because that would like make them feel alienated, but also make them feel
Yep.
like, oh, like this is not for me. Like this is for a
Right.
beginner. I'm on the level two. Like, why are you stating a level one info when I'm already a level two?
So, if I'm hearing you correctly, the way you don't state the obvious is by knowing your audience.
Exactly. This is the
Yeah.
exact point.
So,
Know your audience, and they didn't know their audience, which is the irony. Is what I'm hearing.
yeah. I mean, talk about know your audience for a second here too. Like, it's such a trope. It's such a cliche
Yeah.
at this point. Like, so let's dig into that a little bit, right? I would like to hear your take on know your audience, because we do hear about that a lot. You
Right.
do know your audience very well with your show and with your
Right.
newsletter. What does that look like for you? Like, how are you getting to know your audience?
It's great because like who I'm interviewing is my audience. I think in that sense,
Right.
that's that's great. in situations where my audience is not me, where like maybe let's say I am creating content for customer success managers where I am not customer success manager. I wouldn't
Right.
know, like I might have some idea of where to start. Like knowing your audience really goes back to like looking I think you have some content around this, like understanding what gets them up at night, like what is their pain, like what are they specifically afraid of. That's the emotional piece. Functional
Yeah.
is like what are they trying to achieve, and then what are like how do you get them promoted if there is a B2B company. And then the social is
Yep.
like what are things that they can share that gets them notice, and things like that.
Yep.
And I believe there's like later, much later in this point here, I actually said this is probably one. If who are you talking to is like, I think I wrote down that this is like a great, no, it's much later, but like they do provide like a template where like, oh, here's how to create defining an ideal listener known as an
Yep.
avatar. And then everything you do and every piece of content you create is in service of that one person, which is funny because they didn't it didn't seem like they did that. And my comment here, I think it's like the second comment from the third comment from where we're at right now. It's like this is they show this ideal listener. I made a comment like, cool, you share this link to this ideal listener avatar. Can you show me what an ideal listener avatar looks like for
Yeah.
X Hot Ones, or I don't know, Joe Rogan or something else, or the content studio where like they're showing exactly what that is. And then everything have been discussed earlier around like the emotional, the functional, and the social piece would be wrapped around that avatar, so you can bring up like their anxieties and their struggles, as well as like what they're trying to achieve exactly with their content.
Something about this too, like the and I hate to pick on this piece because it's kind of meta what we're talking about, because
Right.
as we're going through the piece, we're also talking about how to actually do the things that we're talking about here. What I'm not seeing in this piece, right, is you know give them a name, an age, an occupation,
Mhm.
a home life, and so on, but nothing in here, right, is saying talk to people.
Yeah, you're totally right there. I feel like that's so. Yeah, that's a do part. Like they didn't show what an avatar looks like, and then like, cool, how do you create this? The do part is like talk to people, man. Like who talk
Yeah.
to some podcasters, which much later they tried. They have this quote, which I feel like we might get to in a bit, but like it is like definitely something that is missing there. What you mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, cool. Listen, a good host knows when they're heading in the right direction, largely thanks to their audience. If your listener base cares about you at all, they will gladly chime in if you ask them for feedback. What do you say here?
Yeah, what I left here as a comment is like once again, it's just telling of the obvious where like, sure, getting feedback is good. Like the missing piece is the show. It's like, okay, what happens when you listen to feedback? They painted that a little bit here. It'll help you evolve your podcast. If it isn't working, your audience will tell you, and then you can take and then the do part is like, what kind of feedback, how do I ask that question, like do I you're
Mm,
doing a good job. This is a great example where you're doing a good job of getting feedback from the audience. You're asking them to leave a comment. That's one example. That's a great do where like if you have a live show, ask in the comments. What are people questions like, send a like things like the do part,
yeah.
like talk to customers and ask, talk to your listeners and ask them specifically how you can improve your show. Like those kind of things are really missing here. That that is definitely like the next step. It's not just like telling the what, but showing and then doing it, like applicable steps to the next.
And it comes down again to knowing your
Mm,
audience, right?
yeah.
Somebody who's a very beginner, if they're like looking at this and going, how to be a good podcast host, because I'm thinking about having a podcast, there is no audience. right? So saying, hey, do this, this becomes kind of irrelevant,
Yeah, you're right.
right? Which makes me want to tune out. But
Same.
if if I am in the position right now where I say, you know, I have an audience, I have a small audience, I have an audience that wants to grow, or a community that wants to happen, then is it, throw a survey out there to everybody, or is it like, you know, talk to people individually who are willing to talk to you?
Yeah,
And even if it's an audience of 5 people, right? Like, talk to those 5 people,
hmm,
see what they want,
totally.
right?
Yeah, I totally
Cool.
with you there.
All right, be authentic. This is the strongest points.
I that I wasn't trying. I didn't want to be too mean. Like, okay, there's some saving grace here. And what I mean
Yeah.
by that with this is the strongest point is, first of all, they tell listeners value authenticity. Every other podcast component, blah blah blah. Podcasts are incredible intimate medium, which is true. But sometimes people remind that it's there's people listening to it in the comfort of their home alone. They have a quote. They're like first time, like a writer from for the Guardian, which I hope that Rachel here, somewhere in the middle, is a podcaster. I think of podcasters as friends. I am not alone, which is something that I just mentioned. They brought up a new thing that I just learned, which is cool, parasocial interaction, which is like, okay, I learned something. They brought some stats. 83% of podcast
Yeah.
listeners said their favorite podcast host felt like friends. I knew as a podcast host that was true, but to show that stat, and then they provided some tips here. I think the missed opportunity here is again, giving some examples or even challenging it, like what you mentioned earlier. Like sometimes, be a heightened authentic version of yourself could be the next
Mm-hmm.
self. And this is, I guess, how I would take this part to the next level. Show some examples and give some practical tips to it. But I do feel like this has a lot of stuff that is new that I haven't like seen in the other points.
Mm. And we go a little bit further down here too, and we're talking about use everyday language and slang. You said that that was a missed opportunity.
Mm.
Another tell, show, do learning framework. Um, yeah. So talk about that a little bit more.
I feel like that's a missed opportunity where like, what is what is everyday language for one person could be a totally different everyday language for somebody else. And like, to show an example of, let's say, you Tommy, like you have the show content studio, like you use this everyday language that the content marketers would understand, would be totally different than, let's say, the hot ones where they're talking to celebrities, and they're using like regular languages there. I think that's, for me, is the missed opportunity where like that everyday language and slang is relative to the audience that they're talking to. Because everyday language to a bunch of physics scientists, physicists, is like not everyday language to marketers.
Right.
So I think that's like the missed opportunity of like, give an example, like who what show, what audience, and what language they use that made them more relatable there.
Yep. Yeah. And I like that because also everyday language, like you're saying, it is very different for different groups. Joe Rogan has a very different
Right.
everyday language than
Totally.
somebody else,
Yeah.
and because of that, and because he is a version of himself, not that language isn't for everybody. Not
Totally.
everybody likes the way that Joe Rogan speaks, and that's okay as long as you're able to attract the right people and repel the wrong ones. I think you're
I love that. Yeah.
you're you're in a good spot.
Yeah.
Okay, so we go down a little bit further. Break up large chunks of information into digestible podcast segments. There we go. Some practical tips.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, wow, you finally like gave some things that you can share. Like, what does it mean to not overwhelm people? And then they gave some practical tips exactly on how to do this. I mean, that I celebrated that. Like, but like once again, there's showing. Yeah, that's one comment I can leave here. It's like, cool. You finally gave me about like, what is this? halfway through the article, he finally gave me some
Yeah.
like bullet point tips that I can apply right now.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we've got a lot of what we're going to get out of this piece. I think a lot of the points that we'd like to make are pretty much there. Um, so if we had to like sum all of that up, though, like what would be the major thing that you would want to say?
There's one word that comes up when I think about like knowing audience. It's the word empathy. It's like deeply putting yourself in your audience, in that specific audience shoe, and feeling their pain and then understanding what struggles they're going through. That would make the content that much more helpful and valuable, and I think that's the missing piece here. And I feel like that's, you can do a lot, not just in content but in product, in engineering, in marketing. It's like the an added layer of empathy can bring a ton of value in terms of the work that we do to make it even better.
Totally, totally agree. Um, well, Ramli, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time. Um, is there any place that we should be looking for you online?
Yeah, people can find me everywhere, Ramli John, as well as like my show and newsletter. People can just Google Marketing Powerups now and find it on LinkedIn and Twitter, which is this weekly show that I have and newsletter that I highlight marketers like Amanda Natividad, which you had on the show, Kevin Indig, which also you had a show, and of course you.
And yeah, that's really it. If you like this episode, please go ahead and share it with folks. And if you want to sign up for the Content Studio, if you want to get access to Ramley's edit and all of the other guests that we've had on the show, go to thecontentstudio.com/the vault, and you'll get access to all of the different documents that we've had, as well as other exclusive bonus goods, and you can be caught up on the rest of the episodes. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.